Hello, in today's episode of Waylander's Wandering, I'll be continuing my Skills to Scale mini-series, and today I'm going to walk you through the processes that I use running from getting my scale model miniatures from the box to undercoating so that we're ready to start painting. I hope you find this interesting and informative. If you do, please leave a comment below. Now that you've got your miniatures home and safely in their boxes, the first thing you want to do, unless you bought the miniatures yourself, is to check the boxes for damage. As you can see here on this box, there are some creasing on the corners, but no rips and tears. So hopefully everything inside the packaging is hunky-dory. Again, on this ammunition wagon kit, the box itself appears to be totally undamaged, so logically the model inside should be okay as well. Open your box, and as you can see, these parts are outside of their bubble wrap protective packaging, but if we have a close look, we can see that there are a few mould lines, which is acceptable, but there are no obvious miscasts or bubbles or warping, which is something that can happen with resin models. Some companies will tell you that bubbles and slight miscasts are acceptable because resin's difficult to work with, and I accept that resin is difficult to work with, but considering the prices that many companies charge for their resin models, sometimes hundreds and hundreds of pounds, these miscasts and massive bubble holes are not acceptable. Send them back to the store. Give these companies a message. Anyway, on to this Astra Militarum box set. So again, we will open the box up and see what is in there. Okay, the water slide transfers are in there, and there is no damage to the sheets, no water damage, which would be especially egregious, and everything appears to be a nice clean print and to actually go with the miniatures in the box. So again, we have the instruction leaflet, which appears to be the correct one for the miniatures in the box, which is always a good thing. The next thing we will do with this is we will take each of the sprues out of the box in turn and check them to make sure there are no obviously missing or broken parts, which again would lead me to send in the whole box back to the manufacturer or the store that I bought it from to get it replaced. And there are no miscast pieces, because occasionally, and it is only very occasionally with these injection molded plastics, the plastic doesn't quite reach the end of the mold and you get a slight miscast on the extremities of certain molds. These look perfectly fine, and even the very delicate things like this aerial are a-okay as far as I can see. Quickly move through the other sprues in this box. That looks okay. As you can tell, I'm only really looking at the detail sides of these because, quite honestly, if the inside that you can't see is damaged, it's a problem, but it's not a massive problem. But these look a-okay. These are the instructions for putting the tank together, and some more instructions for putting a heavy weapons team together. Here we have the sprue for our commissar, which again, there doesn't appear to be any miscasts, there doesn't appear to be any broken pieces, though looking at this particular fine piece here and this particularly fine piece here, we're going to be a little bit careful when we come to remove that from the sprue. Our additional parts box, so the tart it up box as I tend to call it, appears to be whole and undamaged, as does the actual heavy weapon itself. Everything being okay there, we'll move on to the next stage. Right, for this next stage we will take each piece of the sprue, give it a quick sluice in the sink, bit of warm soapy water to get the releasing compound off, and then a rinse under the tap. Make sure your water is warm, not hot, because very hot water will soften the plastic a bit and could damage delicate parts, and will certainly damage resin parts. You can towel dry these. I prefer to stick them in the drying rack and let them air dry, again so that we don't damage them with excess vigorousness. So just rinse each part, rinse it off, put it in the drying rack. The same goes for your resin pieces. Just sluice them around in the water a little bit, just to get any releasing compound off. Run them under the cold tap to get the soap and bubbles off, because that will affect how the paint sticks. Shake the excess water off into the drying rack until everything's perfectly dry. So I'll get on with that for the rest of the sprues, and we'll talk again when it comes to time to start assembling the models. Now that all the sprues and parts have dried, it's time to get on with the next stage, which is removing the models from the sprue, cleaning up any mould lines and bits of flash, and gluing them together. I'll just be running through the one miniature with this for you on screen. I'll do the rest off camera and show the results afterwards. I'm going to do the commissar model because it had these delicate parts that I mentioned earlier. So, just to get straight on with it, looking at your snips, you will see that they have a flat side and a concave side. You want to have the flat side towards the miniature, so that you get a nice clean cut and very little of the sprue left on the miniature. So I'll go around and we'll cut all of these ones that are pretty obvious, and then when we get to this last one just here, what I'll do, so that we don't put in too much stress on this very fine piece of plastic here, we'll cut it well away from there and pop it out of the sprue. Now, as you can see, we can now get in with the snips and very carefully and gently just pop that off without putting any strain on this and therefore breaking it. Now that it's released from the sprue, you can see that there are a small mould line down here and the mark where it was attached to the sprue. We've got the mark where it was attached to the sprue on top of the shoulder, and a couple of other places around. So take your mould line scraper, very gently pull it along the miniature, and that will take off any rough burrs and rough edges. For that, to give it a final finish, take one of your needle files. I'll be using the triangular one here. Just very gently run that up and take off all the excess bits, leaving you with a nice smooth surface that will be very easy to cover with paint for later. Repeat that for all the sides, and we're off ski. Okay, that's all the parts off the sprue, and we're now ready to begin sticking them together. The first thing we're going to do is probably, for whatever reason, the company have decided that it'd be a really good idea to have his head and his hat separate from his body. And that glue is pooped. It would appear the needle is stuck on that, so we're going to do a naughty thing. We're going to use super glue. Don't tell anybody I'm super gluing plastic miniatures. I'll never live it down. What I'll actually do is, slightly off camera, I've got my palette. I'll put a bit of super glue on the palette, and I will use the fine needle to apply a small bit of glue on there, and then we can stick his face on. Way up. There we go. This is fine and delicate. Oh, really fine and delicate. We keep dropping stuff. That's one way up again. That way around. There you go. Get your face stuck in, son. Okay, I'm having a little bit of trouble with this, peeps. Probably because his face is upside down. There we go. No, yes, no, I don't know. Can you repeat the question? Good golly. If only I could see half as well as I think I can. That's definitely not right. And getcha. Up. Well, I'm making a proper pig's ear of this, peeps. I think if I can just get it round ever so slightly. There you go. And we're in, I would say. And of course, in their infinite wisdom, your man's back of his head and his hat are also separate pieces, because why not? That sort of thing makes perfect sense. So now I'll try and get his hat stuck to the top of his head. Without pulling his head off his body. Okay, we're not having a lot of luck with this, boys and girls. We are definitely not having a lot of luck with this. There, I think that's about as good as we're going to get it on there. It's nice and straight. So with that in mind, what we'll do is we'll stick his legs to the base. That way that other piece has got a little bit minute to cure. There we go. Oh, throwing stuff around. Let's move that out of the way so it doesn't get broken. Turn that over. We'll go there. And his foot will push onto there and get the base, stick him down, and that ought to do. We'll glue on the bottom of the rocks. There we go. Lovely jubbly. Bosh. So, your fella now has a head and a hat. He needs the back of his body sticking on.
his left hand and his right arm. So I think we'll crack on with his right arm, because that looks like it's something that will fit on fairly easily without getting in the way of where we've already put his head on. In fact, no, it doesn't. It goes onto there. It goes, as they say, wallop. There she blows. Now your man's got at least one arm. Admittedly, it's stuck to that and not to his back. But that goes in there, so we'll get a bit of glue dropped into that hole. Again, don't use super glue for this unless you absolutely have to, because, well, to be honest, polystyrene cement is the correct tool for the job. So we'll stick that in there. So now his torso is stuck together and all matches up. His arm with his big sword, I think he's dropping off. His head's on though, and his legs are done. Always look at the positives. Right, let's try this again. So a drop of glue on there. If you're wondering why I keep tapping that super glue on the desk, it is to help keep the nozzle clear, which will improve the life of your glue pot. There we go. Arm on. Maybe not the exact angle that we want. Let's move that around a little. Yes, that looks better. And what we'll actually do is get a little dab on there and put it at the end of that power cable, or whatever it's supposed to do. So his power cable is now stuck to his backpack. Okay, the final piece that we're going to stick onto his body is his pistol. Now, his pistol is already in his hand, and he's going to get stuck to the back of his forearm. We'll do a quick test fit. So it goes there. But what we want to do first is, because of the way these miniatures are cast, there is no obvious barrel to the gun. What we can do is either take a craft knife and put a very small dimple in there, or the tip of one of these files, or if you have access to one, you can get what is called a pin vise, which is a very fine drill, and actually drill out a very small hole for the barrel. This will improve the look of your miniatures, but equally, if you're not steady-handed and you're not confident, just put a little blob of black paint on the end. It'll look like a hole anyway, so you'll look like you've got a barrel on your gun, and that means you don't risk ruining your rather expensive toys. I think I'm going to do it with the point of this. Just get it in there. Give it a little twist, twist, a bit more of a twist, and hopefully that will leave, as you can very finely see, a very tiny little dint in there. I mean, we can use a sharper scalpel. Be very careful with this, because of course these scalpels are super sharp, and I'm not responsible for your fingers. There we go. As you can see, we now have a hole for the barrel of the gun. So with that done, we will pop a tiny bit of glue onto the back of his, where it joins there, and present it up to where it locates on his arm. it for a second or two. Make sure everything's located correctly. Maybe hold it for a second or two longer than that. Again, make sure everything's located properly. Put it down and leave it to cure. Now, this is where you are expected to glue his legs to his torso, but I'm not going to. I'm going to leave that as separate pieces and paint them separately. That way I can get the back of his legs and his boots and everything painted and shaded and highlighted nicely, and the inside of his greatcoat and the sash and everything painted and highlighted nicely before I glue them together, which will give us a much nicer finish on the miniature. But there we go with the dry fit, all glued together. He's looking down the barrel of his pistol, his arms are on, his head's on, everything's glued together. Quite simply, if you follow the instructions, clean up your mould lines and bits of flash, make sure you don't break anything as you're cutting it off the sprue, and if you do, don't lose it. Chances are, especially with these polystyrene plastics, you can glue them back together. And there we go. I will now, off camera, glue everything else together and we'll show you undercoating. Here we are at the final stage before we start putting brush to miniature, the undercoating. It's taken me a fair while to get all these prepared, because there's quite a lot of them and they were quite dirty with flash and mould lines. As I said in the tools video, undercoating can be formed with either rattle cans or an airbrush. I prefer rattle cans, and for these miniatures I'm going to be using a Chaos Black spray paint from Citadel. For a paler finish you can go for a grey undercoat, or for a very bright finish you can even go for a white undercoat. And if you're painting something with a large area that's going to be all one colour, why not get a colour that matches that? So a dark green if you're doing a tank, for instance. I will reiterate, don't use top coats. Make sure the paint you're using is an undercoat, otherwise you will not get the right finish. And anyway, let's get on with this. As always, make sure you give your cans a good old shake and spray from around 10 to 12 inches away. Give them a nice all over coat. Flip them around to hit the other side. Don't worry too much, of course, if there are bits that you don't get with the spray paint, because we will be covering those up later with full paint. So there we have it. Everything's undercoated, so that's everything from the box to getting ready to get your brushes out complete. So join me in the next video where we will start painting our rank and file troops. Thank you for watching, thank you for staying to the end. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and comment to see more content like this. But equally, if you didn't leave a dislike. Thank you for staying to the end, thank you for your patience. I love your faces. Goodbye.